Hey guys, so today we're going to go through changing the subject of a formula as part of equations and formula and also part of algebra. So let's start. So why do we need to change the subject of a formula? Well, often in life and generally in maths and especially science, we're given a lot of formulas to work with. And we need to rearrange those formulas sometimes to make a different aspect or element or variable of that formula the subject or what we want to find out. So we need to rearrange that formula to make one part of it the subject or by itself on the equal side. So let's go through some examples of what I'm talking about. So the first example is a general formula you've probably seen before, which is the area of a rectangle. Now we know the area of a rectangle equals length times breadth. Now let's say we know the area that we want and we know the breadth that we have. What length would that equal? So right now, A or area is the subject of this formula. But this question says make length the subject, so get L by itself. So what do I have on with L on this side of the equals? Well, I have B. It's L times B. So in order to get L by itself, I have to do the opposite of times B, which is divide B on both sides. Remember, with equations, whatever you do on one side, you have to do on the other. Well, that cancels that out, and I'm left with A over B equals L. And therefore, as they equal each other, L equals AB. Now you'll notice I've made L the subject. L is by itself on one side of the equals. And that's what making the subject of a formula is all about. Getting that letter or variable or symbol by itself on one side of the equals. Let's go on to example 2. Here, another common formula that you know, circumference of a circle equals pi times diameter. Now there are two variables in this question, there's circumference and there's diameter, because pi is a constant. We know what its value is. So the question says, make diameter, or D, the subject. So we have pi times diameter. So the opposite of times pi is divided by pi on both sides. Remember, whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other. So that cancels that out. Now I'm left with circumference over pi equals D, and D is by itself. So we made D the subject. Hopefully you're getting the hang of this now. Let's make it a little bit harder. Now we have area of a triangle, and it has three different variables. It has A, B, and H. So now the question says make H the subject. So with the H, I have half times base times height. Half times B times H. So if I want to get H by itself, all these are multiplied with each other. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I can divide both sides by half B. I can do that in 2 steps, or I can do it in 1. They're both the same. It's just easier here to do it in 1 step. Now, when I divide both sides by half B, then I'm left with H by itself, and on this side I have A over half B. So I've got H as a subject, where H equals area divided by half times breadth. Let's make it a little bit harder, where we have a square root into the question. So this here is the formula for Pythagoras. A little bit different to what some of you may be aware, but it's still a form of the formula of Pythagoras. This says make B the subject, so we need to get B by itself. Well, we have a few things with B. We have B and we have the squared with the B. Then we have A squared, and then we have the square root. Now, if you remember from the previous equation videos, leave whatever's directly with the pronumeral till last. So we're going to leave the B squared till last, and then we're going to leave second last A squared, and we're going to get rid of the square root first. So what is the opposite of square root? The inverse of square root is squared. So I square both sides. That leaves me with C squared equals A squared plus B squared, because the square root's gone. Now, remember, leave whatever's with the pronumeral till last. So I'm going to get rid of the a squared. That's a plus a squared. The inverse or opposite of plus a squared is minus a squared. Whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other. So when I take that a squared across, I'm left with c squared minus a squared equals b squared. Now b is still not by itself. I still have b squared. So what's the opposite of b squared? Well, what's the opposite of squared? It's square root. So I square root both sides. They cancel that off. I'm left with b by itself and square root of c squared minus a squared on this side. So now I made b the subject. There's a few steps happening there. Maybe you go back and try that yourself. Let's move on to example 5. Now example 5 says make a the subject. And there's a few things with a. So let's take this a little bit slower, step by step. A is down the bottom here, and that's what I want to get by itself. So, remember, leave whatever is directly with the pronumeral till last. But there's a little bit of a trick I can do in these kind of questions. When the pronumeral is at the bottom of a fraction, which you would have probably used a lot in trigonometry when x was down the bottom of a trig ratio, there's a little bit of a trick we can do. You can do this a long way by multiplying it across and then dividing the other thing down, or the best and easiest way to do is, whenever the pronumeral is down the bottom of a fraction, we can just swap them with whatever is on that side of the equals. Now you can do it the long way, but I'm going to teach you a bit of a trick here and hopefully it'll make sense to you. So because a is down the bottom there, I'm going to swap that with the y. And I get that. A is there now and y is there. So let's start with the black there. You have square root of a equals minus x over y. Now, to get a by itself, there's a square root with it. And the opposite of square root, or the inverse of square root, is squared. So I'm going to square both sides. But this is where it gets a bit tricky. I could leave it as a equals all these brackets minus x over y squared. But technically, indice rules, and if you don't know what they are, you should go back and watch the video on indice rules. That squared applies to the top and the bottom. You could leave that like that, or you could write it like this, as I have in totality there. But the main thing is that a is a subject and a is by itself on that side of the equals. Now, normally we prefer, or the syntax that is correct, is that the pronumeral should be on the left-hand side. It's just the way we read, left to right. Now I've got a few questions here for you guys to do. Pause the video, try the questions, and then come back and look at the answers. Okay, these are the recommended answers. There's a lot happening there. Pause it, mark it off, make sure you got them all correct. If you didn't, go back through the video and watch the examples again, and hopefully that'll help you clarify whatever issues you may have. Hopefully that helped you guys. Till next time, take care.